Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. Really excited for today's guest because he's been in the business for almost 30 years now, doing a lot of great things. I can remember him on the Thomas Crown affair, which was where I first got familiar with him, but he has done so many things in his career, and we're going to talk all about him. It's my honor to introduce to you Mr. Dominic Chianese Jr. And Dominic, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor for me.
It's my pleasure, brother. How you feeling today?
Good, not bad. So, Dominic, I think the first thing I would ask you is, and I ask most of my guests this, is how did you decide that you wanted to get into acting? Was it something when you were a kid that you kind of had an inkling you wanted to do, or did it kind of evolve as you got older?
Great question. Yeah, I was always a bit of a ham, right? The class clown vibe. I liked attention, just basic Leo stuff, middle child, characteristics. But as you know, my father was an actor, and before he was, he was a character actor for decades, and nobody knew who he was, and he really struggled. God bless him. He stuck with it, and he became a success later in life. But he was a struggling character actor. So no, actually, it was quite the opposite. I was like, that doesn't seem like the life for me, right? I certainly didn't study it or anything like that. So it came later. It came in my 30s, and I'll be quite honest with you. I was pushed into it. Or I fell into it, and then was encouraged, let's say, to do it by a girlfriend at the time. It began with a random chance meeting down in Soho. Somebody wanted to take a picture. It turned out to be a famous photographer. What did I know? I was just some, punk kid running around downtown, and she wanted to do some photos, and they got plastered in magazines, and I just kind of dug it, right? I was like, ooh, look at me. I'm in a magazine, which was like a big deal then. There was a thing called magazines in my day, kids. And, then I got, my girlfriend at the time was a model, and she got me into getting an agent. So they pushed me into that. So I started doing like commercial auditions, stuff like that. But what really got me into it was the nightlife business. I started doing, I always worked in nightlife in New York City, one form or another. So I started doing these shows. And it was more stage stuff. So that kind of gave me the bug to perform, right? I always was a creative, but there were always, art or music. But that gave me the bug to perform. And my father did help me once when I was a kid. So I ended up getting an understudy role on some play down at the Public Theater in New York. Eventually went on Broadway. So I got a taste of it, but I basically stuck around, and theater just seemed like a lot of work and kind of boring, right? I liked, the money, but so that was my first introduction to it as a child. But it wasn't until I started doing that and then started getting into stand-up comedy. So that was really what gave me the real performance bug. I started doing stand-up comedy, and this was in the early-ish 90s. So there was like a big, boom with that. But once again, I didn't like the work it took. I was, doing these open mics and bringing the crowd and not getting paid. And I was like, this is, BS. So I decided to do my own underground nightclub show and invited my people and charged them a little bit of money and started using, at the time, very unknown comedians. But if I gave you a list of some of the people who came to do this show downtown, like I had a really hip crowd, so they really wanted to do it, and they would come and test out a lot of their stuff. So I was a front runner of what they called alternative comedy at the time. I was, man, I just to, be that guy and drop some names. The regulars at this comedy night, where we just called it damaged goods, and we did the most like vile stuff we could think of. Like, don't do your Letterman 7, bro. Do like the most, the alternative stuff.
Right.
And it was guys like Louis C.K. and Dave Chappelle, and even Jon Stewart did my stage once. Like, it was like they came and worked stuff out. But nobody knew who these guys were at the time, right? The list goes on, but those were like the biggest names. And so it was a really terrific experience. And then I started going on auditions and stuff. And the first major motion picture you had mentioned that I got was the Thomas Crown Affair. And to be honest with you, I liked the the glamour of it. I liked the big production of it. I loved the money, right? But I really enjoyed doing the nightclub stuff. That was my favorite stuff because I went on from there to be a front runner in the whole like burlesque underground nightclub scene. So I would put on these shows in these really hip clubs that I was working at, but they became like these, freak shows, these circuses, right? And a lot of it was like so underground. They were adult, but it would attract all these celebrities. So I felt like I was like the entertainer for the entertainers kind of thing. You know what I mean? I don't know how else to put that, but it was very underground. It was right before the whole internet craze. So, you had to know about it, right? None of it's on film, so those to me were the glory days. But once and I'll be honest with you, man, I did not pursue it much, right? I had a couple of agents, had management for a short period of time. I really kind of fell into it and got lucky, I suppose. I knew some people, like my father didn't really, he got famous later. I knew some people, but that really wasn't it. It was just that I just kept showing up and I think I didn't care that much. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't like that desperate actor, like, give me work. And I kind of went in with this attitude, like, yeah, I could take it or leave it. And I think that kind of helped me. So people started, so considering that, I worked a lot, but I hesitated to even call myself an actor. My father, I call him an actor. He's into his craft. He did theater for years. He dedicated his life to it. Me, I kind of, did it as a side thing for fun because my girlfriend encouraged me. And then eventually it became more of an artistic outlet for me.
Right. And let me ask you, I know you've been in New York a lot of your life.
All my life.
Grow up there? I mean, were you into sports? Like, I know, listen, you don't have to live in New York and not know who the Yankees are and stuff like that. I mean, did you follow sports as a kid? Or?
Well, I never had the makings of a varsity athlete. I had to do it. I never grew up, but obviously I'm from New York, born and raised. And yeah, you kind of had to be a Yankee fan. I mean, I live in the Bronx still, but I'm a New York fan. Any team from New York, and at the time growing up, I mean, even the Knicks were good, I'm talking late 70s. And, the Mets were amazing and all that. And then, of course, we had that incredible era of the Yankees. But I'm a New York fan. I'm not like, although we do have a joke. You know why people are Mets and Jets fans? Because they can't spell Yankees and Giants. Because no, I'm kidding. God bless them. Mets and Jets.
Right.
I even
Seems
like the man.
Right. Seems like to me though, Dominic, to do what you've done, like to do stand-up comedy, you have to kind of, be that way outside of your everyday. Like you have to kind of be that person all the time because, it's not easy to get up there and speak in front of a crowd, but you have to kind of, be that personality. You have to have that personality for it. And it sounds like to me, like, while you take life serious, you also know that there's got to be some laughter every day and things like that.
Well said, sir. Yes, I don't take myself that seriously, but I take, I take art in all its forms very seriously. I think it's a necessity. I take some things very seriously, just not myself. And I think, as much as an ego is necessary in this business to a degree, you kind of have to take it out of it a little bit. In other words, your talent, I think, is greater than you are. And I think a lot of people forget that. Your talent is greater than you are. If you have a gift, share it, right? It's not about you. It's about this gift that you've been given. And it's up to you to share it. And I think that's the difference between an actor and a movie star, right? I think that's the difference between New York and LA, but you get the idea. You also made a a really good point. I mean, some people are really like funny and outgoing, but then you put them on stage and they kind of. So I would like to just say that doing stand-up first was the best acting school I've ever had, and I'll explain that. First of all, to be a performer, you have to elicit, to be an actor, you have to elicit an emotion from your audience. And the hardest emotion to elicit from an audience is laughter. It's easier to make them sad or scared or angry. It's really easy to make them angry, just, But so to elicit laughter from an audience is difficult. So that was my best training. It was also very in the moment. I believe the great actors, what they're doing is rehearsed improv. And what I mean is they know the lines they're saying, but they have to say it like it's the first time they've ever said it in that moment for it to be believable, or else you're going to telegraph it, you're going to deliver it without authenticity, without the experience of living those words for the first time. So comedies like that. You've seen a million comedians go up on stage like, hey, funny thing happened to me on the way over here. And they say it as if this just happened. It didn't happen to them on the way over here, right? It's a rehearsed bit that sounds like it really just happened. Or they do like the crowd walk, hey, where you from? And somebody says, Miami. And then they go, oh, God's waiting room. It sounds like, which is an old joke, but you get the idea. They have something for every possible answer, right? So it sounds like they're just off the cuff, working the crowd. Sometimes they do, they get better at it, but at first it's rehearsed. So to me, that was very much, and also, exactly whether you're good or not right away, right? Yeah. And you're also very vulnerable and you're very yourself. And I think that is what you need to do as an actor. I got caught once and we quickly thought my way out of it. So I said to somebody, where are you from? They said, Canada. And I went, well, you know what they say about Canadians? And what? And I said, nothing. Nobody ever talks about Canadians. It's nothing funny. But that was funny because it was an aside. It was natural. I had nothing, but you're yourself, right? And also just growing up in Brooklyn, man, people broke on each other nonstop. It's what we did. It's what I learned in school, basically, like how to make fun of your mom. That was the extent of my education. So if you're that street kind of person, you have to be amicable, though. You know what I mean? You still have to have some kind of self-deprecation and be a little bit charming in order to be funny, or else you're just a jerk making fun of people on stage, and nobody wants that.
Right. And Dominic, you touched on this earlier, and I always, will ask a lot of my guests this as well, because it's not easy to be a character actor. And the reason I say that is lots of times you're guest starring on a show that's successful. Now, I think a third watch, you were on a couple episodes of that. And that's
you remember that show, huh?
Yeah. That was
fun. I got to shoot a gun. It was a good time. Go ahead.
Yeah. But that was a very successful series. And I always ask my guests, what it's like to come onto a series where it's successful, and the main cast, they know each other, but then the guest stars, they come in sometimes. And, did you ever feel a little, I don't want to say intimidated, but nervous, because you're going on to their show. They know like how their characters work, and you got to kind of play that for an episode or two. And, was it hard to fit in at times when you do different types of these guest spots, or are they a lot of fun?
Short answer is yes for both of those things. It can be intimidating. It's also a lot of fun. First of all, you're a day player. You don't have to carry the show. You're in and out, right? I guess I was too, either oblivious or cocky to realize that, I was in this situation where I had to fit in, as it were. It's a little easy because you have your lines, you have your character, you hit it and quit it. You know what I mean? Not that much is put on you. But you'd also be very surprised at how many people on those shows are so human. Sometimes people are in character and you got to be like, you get intimidated by them, but then you realize, they're just in their character. But the most intimidating thing about that episode, for instance, was shooting the gun. and we were in an enclosed space, and they actually shoot little projectiles out of them, and I had to be like aware because I was running and shooting behind me. I had to be aware not to shoot at the camera, basically. So that was the most intimidating thing when there's stunts, which I've done a lot of, and fireworks and stuff. That's the most intimidating thing. But as far as the people go, you'd be surprised. Actors are really, most of them are very nurturing, and the ones that aren't, sorry for the kids watching, but. Right. That means, hey, good luck. I never really cared that much. I'm going to tell you this one story, though, when I was on Law and Order. It was the original.
Yeah, I remember that episode.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Jerry Orbach.
I think your character's name was like Bobby or Billy, right? I think Bobby, right? Bobby Ward.
It might have been.
Yeah.
Wow, you got a better memory than I do. Thanks, man. Thanks for paying attention. I really appreciate it. By the way, I just want to tell your viewers or your listeners that when you reached out to me, whenever it was, about a week or so ago, and you were like, hey, I want you to do my podcast. I said, I think you're looking for my father.
Right.
And then you were like, no, I'm looking for you. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. Thanks, man. Like, because I never think of that I have a career as an actor, right? I thought I did it. But the fact that people did actually appreciate my work and remember it is really touching. So thank you personally.
Oh, no problem. Yeah.
So Jerry Orbach, who was like, in my eyes, this fantastic character actor. He was around since the black and white days. Like he had a real career. And we were on set, and obviously he was so entrenched in that character. Now I knew Jesse, luckily, from before. That's another thing. I always knew somebody like in the periphery, so I felt a little more comfortable. But I put on this kind of like accent for that character. I was kind of like supposed to be the stupid, right? The stupid cousin or whatever. And Jerry at one point kind of mimicked me, and I was like, hey, you hurt my little feeling, but because I'm actually sensitive in real life. And I was like, and he was like, nah, you're doing great. I was just messing with you, so it was kind of like that. It was playful, right? But they were really friendly, except for the fact that he actually put me through the drywall in the scene where they cuffed me. It was on location. Yeah. He literally went through the wall of some poor person's house.
And I think about this, Dominic.
Yeah.
When you get to be on shows like that, like I said, Law and Order, Third Watch, Sex and the City, you were on for an episode. The Sopranos, you were on for a few. Like, those are shows that are so established and they're so popular and successful. So when you get to even work on 1 or 2 episodes, to me, that's where you make it as an actor. Like people could say, the old saying, oh, well, they have to be around for 50 years. That's not true at all. I think if you're in these successful shows and they have you playing an important part, even if it's for 1 episode, that's where you say to yourself, you know what, I made it. And that's how you have to really kind of take it, is I did make it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yes, there are a lot of actors, and I'm flippant about it and probably a little entitled about it. So I didn't mean to sound, dismissive of the myriad of people across the world and who would die from my career, right? Who spent years in school and on, hustling to get like a fraction of what I did. So I want to just say, keep it up, and you're doing great. And my father's a perfect example of what can happen later on. But it's true. If you put out 1 hit song, right? What are the odds of that? Like, that's good enough, man. You're officially a musician. So, right. I didn't want it to sound falsely humble. I just didn't give myself that much credit. But now that you put it that way, it's true. It was a successful, but short-lived career. I will say that as far as Law and Order goes, they were on for so many years. They had so many spinoffs, and they mostly cast you here in New York. Every actor in the world had a shot at that. So it wasn't like, like eventually they come around to you if you have an agent. Eventually they're like, all right, we need another knucklehead, whatever. So I don't want to take too much credit, but I was always in the room with 5 or 6 other people. Sex and the City, I read for 10 times. Even The Sopranos. First of all, the Sex and the City, I literally read for 10 times.
Right.
And the last time I went in, I was like, guys, This was like my third callback. I was like, guys, I've been here 10 times. It's like, it's a hot dog guy. Come on, just give me. I literally just said, give me the gig. Stop calling me to come in and not giving me the gig. It's a couple of lines. I could do this. Just give me the gig. And they laughed. And I was like, well, I just blew it. They're never going to call me back again. But no, it was the exact opposite. They gave me the gig. And that's what I mean by my kind of like, I don't care confidence. Sometimes it works. The Sopranos is another great one. Like, I was a shoo-in. I'll give you a quick story. Before my bit role in the end season, which ultimately was a favor, I was called in for the second season. There were those flashback scenes of Tony as a kid.
Oh, and I bet they wanted you to play Uncle June, right?
They needed a young junior.
Yeah.
So obviously I got a call. I went in, I read 3 times. I mean, they weren't just going to hire me on, but I remember the third callback and they're all there. David Chase is there. They're all there. And as a, I threw in like one improv line at the end and they kind of chuckled. I was like, now's my chance. Be a human, stop being nervous. And I went, guys, I am my father 30 years ago. I said, this is a casting coup. Okay. I'm just saying. And they laughed and they actually did book me, but it didn't pan out in the end. It was a very big disappointment, but it didn't pan out for a number of reasons. So that by the last season, they're like, all right, we got to get this kid in. And I'll give you a quick story about that too, because I love to talk, obviously. Yeah. The amazing thing about that show, and I had been on set, I was friends with a lot of them. Like me and Michael Imperioli go back way before the show. Drea Di Matteo, we were all like, we hung out downtown. We were friends already, and obviously my father. So it was kind of like coming home to a certain degree. And I had met everybody at that point by the time I was on set. But they were really secretive about, you would get your script the day before, right? And by the time you got to set, they might have changed it. So my part was really cut to shreds. It ended up, even what I did put on film ended up on the floor. So I ended up being a glorified extra. You know what I mean? And I thought I was really going to get like this kind of like, but it's such an honor just to be on that set, working with those amazing people. And as disappointed as I was by the show, the fact that I could have that on my resume is kind of like, it's kind of a big deal. A lot of people think it's because I was a shoo-in. And to some degree, it was. Once again, nepotism will get you in the door of a lot of businesses, right? But it's your talent that keeps you there. So I can't help but think that, I was a little messy in those days. That's another story. It was a bad time in my life. But so I can't help but think that maybe they cut my part because of me, but also it was because they were so, they were like the actual mob. It's like, we can't let this stuff get leaked. They would be like, switching phones, doing walk talks, it was like, it was really like, it was so top secret, like if you read what was happening on that show, dude, you would have been blacklisted for life from show business.
Right. And let me ask you, Dominic, because in that first episode you did, you say the one line about the sheep, which was funny. And it's funny. I always see the character, Phil Leotardo, played by the late, great Frank Vincent. He kind of gives your character like a look, like keep your mouth shut or whatever. So
like that wasn't funny.
I thought about this right now when you said, some of the stuff got cut out, like you ended up being more a glorified extra. Was there ever a scene in that they might have used at some point where Phil kind of like gives it to you, kind of berates you? I mean, like, were we going to see that and they cut it out?
Right. That's a great question. No, that didn't happen. Although an alternative take on that would have been funny. But this is the thing about a lot of those characters. They would make these decisions and they would stick with it. And the directors and so forth had so much respect for particularly a guy like Frank that they were like, that's his decision. Don't tweak it. And I think that's what great directors do.
Yeah. Right?
In his mind, Phil didn't like the disrespect. Even though he was his own crew, he didn't like that somebody would disrespect him. And he was also so homophobic as the character. So to say something like that, about a boss, even though it was a sheep, it was still like, whatever. He was just that guy. Like you didn't make, and that's true. It's a very accurate depiction of a lot of that era of gangster. I I always tell this story, and I want to share it with your listeners too, because it was so indicative of the late great James Gandolfini, who, as we all know, was just an epic actor.
Yeah.
And that character itself. But I just share this story because I was fortunate enough to be in the room during a scene with him and Frank, may they rest in peace. And it was down on Mulberry Street in one of the old school spots, and they were having a sit down. So, half of his crew was there, half of mine was there, and I was in the background. Jimmy was such a humble guy. He knew his character, but he still within himself was always trying to improve. And I didn't know this about him until we were sitting between takes, and he kind of looked perturbed. And I was sitting next to him. James and I was lucky enough to have a rapport with him before that. So I was like, "What's up, Jim?" And he was like, I go, "What's up, man?" He goes, "Tony wouldn't take that shit from Phil." Like, he talked about Tony as another character, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "He just wouldn't sit there and take that the way he's talking to him." I was like, "I know what you mean." I said, "Do you mind if I, offer you something?" He was like, "No, yeah, go ahead." Like, that's the guy. He would take feedback from, granted, he knew me, but even if he didn't, he would take feedback. So I said to him, "I don't know if you realize this, Jim, but you have such presence on screen that if you just raised an eyebrow or cocked your head an inch during something he says, the whole mood of the scene changes. The audience knows that you're going to whack the guy in that moment. That's how much effect you have. And it's so subtle." And he didn't even know that about himself. And he went, "Really? Like that?" Oh, I get choked up thinking about it. I went, "Yeah, trust me." So they had done a few takes, so when they went back, one take, he did it. I couldn't look, but later on I saw it. Phil says his thing, and he just, that look he has, just so subtle, but it said everything. And they were like, "Cut, moving on." So that's what I love about him. And he was like that with everyone. He was like that with my father. I mean, I can go on and on with stories about him and my old man. And my old man was very much like Frank, man. He made a decision, dude. It didn't change no matter what. You couldn't tell that diva anything. It's not much different today. They're true craftsmen. But I think that, and the reason why I share that story is not only because he's amazing and it was such a privilege working with him, but that is the sign, I believe, of somebody whose talent is greater than they are. They're not full of themselves. They're not even aware of how much power they have, especially after something like that. And I'm just going to say this too about acting in general. A show like that really, really sharpens an actor's teeth. My father did the best work of his life. When I watched that show, I was looking for my father, right? Because everything he's ever done, I kind of saw a little bit of him in it. Way back to The Godfather, I was like, yeah. But Junior, man, there was no sign of my old man. And this is the reason why. I think it was because it was so well written, and it was like every week was another movie. It was like an 8-year-long movie. Now, in comedy, you get to improv, you get to grow your bits. And I think it was the same thing in this. In theater, you get to do it over and over again, night after night. So you can improve, but it's the same lines every time. In film, you get to do multiple takes, so you can improve it to get that perfect take, right? But it's, once again, you only see one take. With something like this is that you get to improve with the character as it expands, as the lines change and the scenes change and the character grows, you get to grow with it. So that's why I think these guys did such a great job. And that's why I think we remember people who do episodic stuff and we become so attached to them because their talent and the character, we grow with them. So that, to me, if there's any, aspiring actors out there, remember that, there's always room for growth, and that like any art form, stay humble, right? But be persistent. And like you said, your success comes if you like it, right? Like if I painted pictures in my house and nobody ever saw them, if I liked it, they're good paintings, right? If I make music for myself, but we do it for the love of it, which is,
Right.
by the way, what amateur means. It means for the love of. So don't worry about the money you make or how much professional accolades you get. Nobody's ever going to know what I did underground in those nightclubs, but I did, and man, they were fun. And I'm proud of what we did. We created a scene, So
Yeah. And Dominic, I think about this like, we find out that you're a very funny guy and, you're quick witted and things like that. And I just feel like while you're not as involved in the game like you used to be, you still could do other things like with the comedy. Like, listen, this gives you the platform nowadays, like to do something online where you could be. And I think like that's something that I hope eventually you will let the viewers see because you have that gift. And, nowadays you used to have to go on HBO or go on Showtime to watch stand-up comedy. Now you can just see it on YouTube. You could see it on Spotify, whatever it might be.
yeah.
So it gives you so much creativity. And I just feel like you have that gift. And I really hope that this, the best is still yet to come. And we haven't just seen the last of you as a worker because you're just phenomenal at what you do.
Wow, thank you so much. And for your listeners, we never met. So this is a genuine, authentic praise. And I'm humbled by that. And I'm truly grateful. And I'm really appreciate that. And yes, you have a great point. There's so much medium out there, right? And there's so much entrepreneurial opportunity for people. And you're right. You don't have to be, everything is disrupted now. Show business, period, across the board, music, art, everything. And it becomes our own. Now, the problem is a lot of artists, art and business are strange bedfellows. A lot of artists don't have the business savvy or whatever to sell themselves, right? Which is why we always got agents to do a lot of our work. So it's something that I happen to be pretty good at. I promoted my own shows, I produced them, and then I performed in them. So that really hones a lot of what you do. But yeah, thank you. My dream is or my aspirations, and I have been for a while, and I had a couple of opportunities, but what you said was very important. My aspirations now as an entertainer or an orator or somebody who could be at least, I suppose, to some degree. I'm looking at myself right now, and I'm like, ugh. But I suppose if I did a few filters and a couple of tricks, and anyway, even though I'm not much to look at least, I do have some, I suppose, media appeal, right? If I could do something that I guess got traction, it would be infotainment or edutainment. I would want to, with a sense of humor and with a certain amount of, humor, and actually give people useful information. I think that's the best way we get it. And that's why a guy like Jon Stewart has always been my ideal, because he started as a comic just like I did. I remember hanging out with him, Dennis Leary, a bunch of other, I did the Jon Stewart show on MTV. It's not on my resume, but it should be. And he was, that was his big break of doing this variety show, but he did stand up like we all did. He used that media personality and that notoriety to actually get a great message across. And he did some really great work as an activist, and he still does his podcasts and his, and I to me, that is the best thing you could do with a media presence. So thanks for sharing that with me, so I can actually be inspired to possibly do that, because my field definitely could use some more awareness and more palatable voices. I work in the not that you're asking, but I figured I would just say this to anybody who might be listening. I work as a counselor or a mentor, call it what you will, in the substance use disorder is my specialty. So I help addicts get clean and sober. I work with people who have other, let's just call them disorders, right, or struggles. So that's what I do. That's my calling now. Don't get me wrong. If somebody gave me an acting gig, I'd be there in a second, right? But that's more of a calling, much like the arts were, which is still a passion, but not so much a career. So if I could somehow combine those two things and bring that awareness and solution ultimately to a larger audience, if anybody's listening who's got a platform, I'm your guy. I'd be more than happy to do that. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to make it human and bring such a serious, like I said, I take some things very seriously, right? If you could bring such a serious thing as mental health and recovery from addiction into the spotlight, that could actually, not be this depressing, long-winded clinical approach, I think that would be a great idea, particularly for younger people who just don't really want to hear some old guy drone on about drugs are bad and good. It's just like, yeah, bro. If you could actually just give a twist to it that points out the absurdity of our behavior, and then actually break down simple solutions, right?
Yeah.
Me, those were my favorite teachers, right? So I am at the age where I do look like a professor, so I could probably have some credibility for that alone, but I could still talk to people, like another knucklehead from Brooklyn.
And Dominic, I think about this too, with, like I said, because you really are a genius when it comes to comedy and with your quick wit. And this was something I always thought would be cool, not so much for myself, but anybody to do, is to, like, we were talking about Sopranos before. It would have been really cool for somebody to interview your father playing Uncle Junior, like playing his character. And I really think it'd be cool for you to be the one to interview your father as Uncle Junior, because you have that quick wit. And, when he's getting mad at like certain questions as Uncle Junior, you could come back with like, those funny comebacks. I think that'd be something really cool that you and
the
your dad
outtakes alone would be the whole show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. It kind of hit a sore spot there. So that's why I'm like, ugh. That was my idea. Because of all the people I knew, I put together a show, and I was, spend a lot of time and money putting together something for this platform years ago, where I interviewed different well-known celebrities about different subjects, right? All important subjects. And each one kind of worked around what they were doing, right? And my father was a guest, and quite a few others, but it ended up just sitting away somewhere, and it has always been a point of contention. So once again, even with that sting, like, oh God, this guy's so right, I wish I would have stuck with it. You're inspiring me to do it again, and I appreciate that.
I think about this, Dominic, is like anything else. You mentioned this about how it took your father a long time. He was a character actor, but that part came. And I still believe, like, and I don't think if you never did anything else, you're still a success, because again, you did stuff that it's hard for anybody to do. So, but there's always that chance that something big could still happen. Just because we get older doesn't mean we stop getting better. And I really believe that the best is yet to come. And I really think, like, listen, I've watched some great comedies over the years. And, I think of Jerry Seinfeld. He was really a stand-up comedian and did nothing else. Seinfeld kind of happened because he pitched it to the network. And then next thing you know, he was this big celebrity. And the ironic thing was, when Seinfeld ended, he went back to stand-up. He didn't act in anything else. He wanted to. And I think, like, there's still that opportunity for you, to still go back to TV if you choose to do so. And you could really do something that would be really cool for people to see.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm going to play that exact quote to, the next agent I talk to. I really appreciate that. And I couldn't agree more. My father, like I said, got The Sopranos at the age. Now, everybody knew him as a character. Not everybody, but a lot of people knew him as a character actor. He was always respected, but nobody knew who he was. And he was a little older than me when the show came around. And I agree. I believe in I just entered my 60s, and it is an age of mastery. to a degree, like at this point, but your point that I really appreciate, and I wanted to just repeat that, is success. Like, define success.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that, because fame is not it. As far as I'm concerned, money is not it. Success is defined if you are following your passion, following your bliss, reaching as many people in a positive way as you can. And even if it's not on through this medium, even if it's just in your community. I'm getting emotional again. I'm raising a son, 16 now. He just turned 16 this summer. Dominic III, because of course. He calls me a good dad. To me, that's a success. If you ask me what I do, I'm going to tell you. I'm a dad, right? That's what I do.
Right.
What I do in my field is like swimming against the tide at times. We lose people, as you know. It's a very serious disease and people die from it. One person. If I help one person, I'm a success, right? If I help change one person's life. So I couldn't agree more. Don't stay still. Don't say that was then, this is now. Or if you do go say that, just go, okay, that doesn't define me. And, why not keep going? And why not try something new? I started my career in my 50s, this one. And once again, just say yes. That's the way I've gotten everywhere. When I was in the nightclub industry and I ran some of the, most successful happening spots, I started as a busboy. And just say yes. Somebody goes, hey, you want to do this? Go, yeah, sure. Why not? As long as it doesn't compromise your core values.
Right.
That was a very inspiring thing. And I'm going to say to you, sir, that you have a way, like, you have a way of, now maybe it's my ego and I love hearing that I'm a genius, but you do have a way of, inspiring people to push forward, even if sometimes it's like, you might dig it there, like remorse or insecurity is good. I think you as well could be, from, for lack of a better term, a motivational person yourself,
Oh, thank you. That's very
nice.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Maybe the two of us should start one to like get people going, take calls and be like, listen, you're not a loser. Shut up. That's a lie. Get back out there.
Well, I just look at it this way, Dominic, like it is a hard business. Listen, look at all the child actors who had fame. And then so many of them later on in life, they had to work like, so many of us have to do. Like it's no guarantee it's going to be there with you forever. So if you are working and you are getting guest spots, it doesn't matter. Somebody getting a guest spot isn't any lower or any better than somebody who's been on a series for a long time. If you're working and they're working, you're both successful, and that's how you have to look at it.
That's absolutely right. I know a lot of, it used to be like your big break or you're a known person. Listen, I know guys my age and, who in a lot of like punk rock and hardcore bands who like now are legendary, right? But they were broke for years, right? And they're still touring. They're still out there touring, right? And they're riding in a van and they're sleeping in hotels, right? They're not rich. They're just known.
Yeah.
But they love what they're doing, right? My father still sings, 94 years old, God bless him. He'll take his cane onto stage, pick up a guitar and sing with people because it's the love of that. So that's what the success is. If you're entertaining 10 people in a room or 10,000 people, on a YouTube channel or, millions of people, across the globe during a world tour, you got to love it the same way. And I've learned that. And I would sit at the table with anyone. And the guy who's a struggling actor, comedian, songwriter, walked into a room that I knew him and I was sitting with Mr. Big Shot. I wouldn't be like, you can't sit with us. I'm with the big shots. I'd be like, my man, come sit at the table with us because they are peers.
Yeah.
They are peers. And quite frankly, in America, mediocrity is usually the most successful performers. You know what I mean? This kind of like formulated, cookie cut out, easily palatable by some real basic, with some basics. I hate to say that. I sound like such an elitist and such a, dismissive person. But let's face it, we strive for mediocrity half the time. So some of the most talented people have had to dull their edge a little bit in order to become in the field, but eventually then they get to do what they want. And then some of the people who are the most talented won't be recognized because it's just too, doesn't have a broad enough appeal. If you don't have a broad appeal, folks, good, you're doing something right. Yet, if you do touch a note with something that has this universal thread to it that a lot of people like, then yeah, that's fine too. Doesn't mean you're basic. It just means that you've hit something, you found something. So once again, when I grew up here in New York City, particularly downtown, there was a scene that came up amongst a bunch of, it was a depression. It was it was a bad time in New York, and people were filled with angst and worry, much like today. And what was born out of that was punk rock. I literally saw it born. Hip hop, born here in New York. And we were just a bunch of angst-ridden kids who didn't know what to do with it. And it became expressive. Now, those are iconic words in global culture now, right? So I've seen that in my lifetime. So if any of the people are out there going, oh, this doesn't work or that doesn't work, bullshit. It works for you. And if you like it, it's a success. And my 16-year-old son is a guitar player, and they give me such hope. They do these DIY gigs, man, with a bunch of them, communicate on social media. They descend upon some abandoned areas, set up their equipment, shred, mosh, like cause noise, and then just dismantle and scatter.
Yeah.
And it's so inspiring to see. And they're not making any money, but they're having fun and they're creating a scene. And to me, that gives me hope in a sometimes very bleak world. So if
exactly,
keep it up, rock and roll, man.
Exactly. So Dominic, before we go, what would you say to the fans that, seen your work and they enjoy watching you? What could you tell them to expect in the next year or so for Dominick Chianese?
Wow, that is such a sweet thing to say, man. The fact that to consider that I even have fans, right, is really. But I will say that I am dedicated to my cause. So if you do see me, it's probably on a speaker circuit, right? And if you see me performing, it's to capture hearts so that I might imply a message of hope.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. There's a couple of things might be coming out. I tend not to talk about it because I think it puts the kibosh on it a little bit. But, for sure, if you happen to be at some downtown event and there happens to be a performance, I might be a guest MC. I still do that stuff. That's probably your best bet of catching me. But ultimately, yeah, if you expect anything from me, and now with your inspiration, is to hear me as myself, bringing a message of hope to those who might be in darkness.
I think that's a great response. I really appreciate you giving me some minutes today. And folks, I would just say this to you, that this gentleman, he made his way in the world on his own, on how he wanted to do things. He never gave up. He's done a million things. And again, like I said, he is definitely a success story because he set out to do something and he made it happen. And I think the best message he gives to fans like myself everywhere, because like you look at me doing this, folks, it's not easy, but the message he gives to me is if you're working, if you're doing something every day, you're making a difference and you're surviving and you are a success. And I think that's the ultimate message that Dominic sends. So Dominic, I really applaud you for everything you're doing. And it was a real honor for me to have you on today. I'm very proud of that. And thank you for giving me a few minutes.
It was my honor, sir. And boom, that was just beautiful. So that's a great takeaway. Thank you, man.
Well, thank you again. And folks, that's the one and only Dominic Chianese Jr. Keep watching him, keep looking for him, because he's one of the real good people in the business. For In the Spotlight, I'm Mike Chianese saying good night, everyone.